Hello everyone, this is Robert, and this is the Ortur Laser Master 3. Yes, another diode laser review. This one should be maybe a little bit different. I wasn't going to do any more of these, but you'd be amazed. I get like 5 requests a week for these diode laser reviews, and I turn them all down. But I actually really did like the Ortur, and this one actually seems to be a little bit different than the others, so we're going to see if that is the case. This one also has the optional laser engraving platform and the air assist, 2 things that I think are kind of essential to have, so we'll see what all this looks like. As always, be sure to use the chapters, jump around, find the sections that interest you, all that good stuff. I'm going to start with kind of the basic unboxing and setup. I'm not going to go too long on that. And then, yeah, we'll see what this thing's all about. As I said in the intro, there's so many of these diode lasers out right now, and not many of them really seem to understand how laser engraving and cutting works. They're getting higher and higher power, you know, 10, 20 watts, things like that, but they're not addressing the big issue, which is clearing out the debris that is kind of vaporized when that laser hits. For engraving, it's maybe less of an issue, but for cutting, it's absolutely a major issue because as the laser kind of penetrates down into the material, you really need to be blowing that out with an air assist or else it's only ever going to get so deep. And a lot of these times you'll see them only cutting with like basswood or something like that. And you'll see, oh, 10 millimeters or 20 millimeters depth of cut with basswood. Well, no one uses basswood, and you can cut basswood just by looking at it wrong. So it's kind of an unfair test. If you're doing MDF or any kind of hardwood or even softwood, it's a much different experience. So having this air assist is pretty critical to that process. So the thing about lasers is they don't necessarily stop just when you want them to stop. So if you're cutting through material and you're cutting through it, it's just going to keep going until it hits the next thing. And I've learned this many times when I'm testing out these diode lasers because I'll cut through something and I'll remember, oh yeah, there's nothing behind it except for my workbench, and it'll just kind of keep going through. So you always need to have something kind of behind what you're cutting to make sure that you can actually, you know, stop the laser from just going and going and going. And that's what this is. It's a laser cutting platform, and it is meant to do one of 2 things. It's meant to allow you to cut through something and not have the laser go down into your workbench or wherever else, but it also has these kind of little fins or slats to elevate your workpiece up. If you just have like a raw board underneath of it, it's going to come through that cut and then hit against that, and then you get a really nasty cut on the bottom side. You need that laser to kind of fully penetrate through and not have the exhaust or the gases or anything like that come up. So helping it raise up from the work surface is pretty critical in getting good cuts. So I'm going to go ahead and put this together, but yeah, okay. This is actually surprisingly nice. These are extruded, I'm guessing, aluminum panels, and yeah, this whole thing actually fit and finish looks pretty decent. So yeah, let me throw this together real quick and I'll be right back. I get kind of annoyed with these diode lasers because they sell them without any of these accessories, and they just kind of sell it as the basic XY gantry system with a laser diode just slapped on there and some really basic electronics, but there's more to it than that. As I mentioned with the air assist, the bed is also kind of another accessory that I think is, I wouldn't say it's critical, but it's really nice to have, and it really changes the experience that you have. Now this is an optional accessory, and it's I think about $150, so you know, it's not cheap. But there are other options. You can do a honeycomb bed, you can do something like this, but if you're going to be doing any amount of cutting, being able to raise that workpiece up is absolutely critical to your cut quality. And like I said before, you're just going to cut through and cut into your workbench, whatever else. So it is something that is really nice to have. And then also aligning your parts, things like that. That's kind of why these things exist. So I got the bed thing together, a laser engraving platform together, and it's actually pretty decent. A couple little gripes. This side over here kind of sticks a little bit. This side is nice and free, but this one kind of sticks. I don't like this. This is not my favorite thing ever. However, I think since you have a laser cutter now, you could easily laser cut this beam, and then I would do some 3D printed thing that sat in the channel, because this is too skinny. You're always going to have an issue with this. The platform itself is actually really nice, surprisingly so, but this is just a little bit rough and a little bit difficult to use, but you can definitely use it. But I think getting it actually lined up square is going to be tricky. And then, you know, same with this. This is a little bit tricky, but you could very easily laser cut, 3D print your own thing, and then still use this. This is actually really, really solid. I was kind of surprised by this. So yeah, set this aside and let's go on to the actual laser. Ooh. So here's everything on the unboxing. Obviously there's going to be a little bit of assembly, but man, this all looks pretty nice. All this stuff is very similar, but it's kind of nice to see some custom extrusions, you know, and a little bit of extra fit and finish and some nice pieces here. So I'm going to throw this together, maybe 15 minutes. We'll see. I'll let you know when I'm done. So yeah, let's do that. Time lapse. I'm not going to spend too much time with the assembly of this. Follow the instructions. Everything's pretty straightforward and it worked out. It's definitely a little bit more involved, I think, from start to finish. And, you know, I always kind of got to make sure stuff's in frame, and it's always a little bit more annoying at doing it on camera, but I'd say from start to finish, it was maybe a half an hour. You could probably bang it out in 20 minutes if you didn't have to mess with all the recording and whatnot, but it's pretty straightforward. There is a little bit of putting the belts on and belt tensioning, but actually the system that they have for that is really nice. It's a little fiddly, a little kind of tricky to get it done, but it actually works out really nice, and I never felt like the belts were not properly tensioned, things like that. It actually all works out pretty good, and quite frankly, if you're going to have an issue putting this together and need to consult the manual way too many times, or post on a Facebook group or a forum, you probably shouldn't be messing with a laser like this. It's really pretty simple, and you only have to do this once. That's the beauty of it. So many YouTubers get too hung up on, oh, the assembly and it takes this much time. You do it once. You're going to have this thing and spend a lot of time with it. You only have to build the thing one time, so it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that, no big deal, and it is really, really hard to screw up. So I wanted to stop the assembly and take a second just to talk about the laser head since it's off right now. This is actually pretty nice, a little bit different than what I'm used to seeing. A couple little things to note. It kind of has like this dovetail thing that slides in here. This is almost always my issue with these things, is they fit kind of weird. It'd be nice if it was a little bit smoother up and down, but this one does kind of have this little, I don't know, this little like gib strip almost that you're pressing against that. It's not just a set screw on a single point, it's actually pressing a little flange of metal against that. So that's kind of clever. This isn't my favorite. I like the other ones that have a magnetic. This one just kind of slides in there like that, and maybe not my favorite. It does have this little cool feature with just this little flip down focus. I'm guessing that's for the focus, but that is your focus gauge. Just kind of flips down, use that to press against your material. That's your focus, flip it back up. Pretty clever. And then obviously it comes with the little air assist regulator and the fitting. So yeah, pretty neat stuff. So let me continue putting this together. The wiring harness on this was pretty straightforward. It's kind of weird. I'll talk about this in a second, but they kind of have like some extra plugs on there that don't really seem to go to anything. And I just, at some point, the engineer, whoever it was that designed this, was like, you know what? Zip ties or cable track? Cable carrier or zip ties? And they just said, zip ties is good enough. Well, that was the wrong answer. You should have done a cable carrier. Zip ties are nice, but it really needed a cable carrier. So before we turn this thing on, I've got a couple of notes. I like that they include some sort of cable management, but I'm not exactly thrilled with it. It's just a couple zip ties along this back. This can definitely travel to both ends. Yeah, maybe it needs to come out a little bit. Just not my favorite. A cable carrier would have been nice. And also on this other side, same kind of thing, is The cable just dangles here. It is a really nice structured cable though, but it just is kind of free on this side, which is kind of weird given the fit and finish on everything else. Another strange thing, let me just flip this around. You can see that, yeah. Over here, we've got the micro SD card slot, a reset, and what was the other button? A reset and some other button over here. So it's kind of interesting. This is where the gantry goes. So this is like me facing it. The gantry does stop here, but it's just kind of weird to have your micro SD here, whereas on this side you've got your USB and your power and your Wi-Fi antenna. So, you know, I don't know, just a little bit interesting. And also you've got a couple excess cables over here. This one's labeled Z, I think, and this one is, what is that? Come on. C? I don't know what C is. I'm guessing one of these is maybe for a Z height adjustment. But yeah, just kind of interesting that they're just kind of dangling off here. So the wire management is definitely not my favorite. And then in the back over here, you've got this Y motor and then a selection for YRR. I'm guessing that's for the rotary axis. Pretty typical where you can switch from a Y axis this way or rotary, which just goes that way. So yeah, pretty interesting. But overall, man, this thing is really nice. This is definitely the nicest diode laser that I've ever had the opportunity of looking at. Really nice. The structure is good. Everything looks good. Let's turn it on and do some stuff with it. Sloppy me, I almost forgot the air assist. That's kind of like one of the big points of this. You got this little, I think this is 6mm tubing slot up here. You can kind of press that in. It does come with this little regulator, which is kind of nice. It's like a little flow needle valve. It comes with this and this other thing, but I'm not going to use that because the air pump already has regulation on it. So we can go really slow or really fast, and it comes directly out this nozzle. This whole thing also came with this whole tubing and a little nozzle holder, but we don't need that. And I'm mentioning this because none of this is anywhere in the instructions. They mention it coming with this, they mention it coming with this tubing, but they don't really tell you how to put anything together, of course. So anyway, this is nice though because it comes right out the hole. It doesn't come like around the outside, it comes right through that middle, which is exactly what it should be doing. And from what I can tell, there is no control for this on the machine. There's a little I/O thing somewhere over here. Maybe you could use that to control it, but right now this is all manual. So when you start your cut, you're just gonna have to manually start that as well. Not a big deal, but you know, just something to keep in mind. So yeah, let me get this all hooked up. So I've got it all set up, connected into the computer, connected into power, got the hoses and the tubes and all that stuff going. There's 3 power switches. We've got the emergency stop, which we have to undo. Then we also have this keyed switch. You know, we're basically launching a missile. So we're gonna put that in there, turn that on, and then we've got the actual power switch over here, which looks like we're good. Yep, so it's gonna do its little homing routine, and that will be good to go. While it's doing its little thing, software. This will work with pretty much anything. It's gonna work with Lightburn, Laser Gerbil, as well as I think they have their own app. Oh, yeah, cool. For me, I'm gonna be using Lightburn. The thing you should know is if you're gonna be doing a lot of lasering and this is gonna be kind of a big thing of yours, okay, I don't know. Lightburn is gonna be the best solution, but you're also gonna have to pay for it. Laser Gerbil is gonna be a good alternative to that. And then their own software is probably perfectly fine. I'm not gonna go into a lot of detail because I'm very familiar with Lightburn and it's kind of been my preferred. So just keep that in mind. But it will have several options that you can use. So I did some test cuts just to check and make sure everything was working the way it's supposed to, and found out that I was not getting circles, I was getting a little bit of ovals, and it turns out that this gantry was just a little bit cockeyed. Turns out you can kind of get the belt to where it's kind of on a slant, so I fixed that and everything should be good now. This is 3mm something. What is this? I don't even know. You can get this at like Home Depot or Lowe's. It's just kind of like a pine. It's like a softwood kind of thing, but it's very resinous. As you can kind of see, it cuts and leaves this stuff. And I use this for testing because it's a lot more difficult to cut than a cardboard, a little bit more difficult than an MDF. It's actually kind of tricky, and you absolutely need to elevate it because of that resin that kind of comes out of it. If you don't do that, it just won't cut all the way through. So that looks good. Let's see how thick we can cut. This says it can do about 10 millimeters. Let's see what I've got, and we'll see how thick of material we can get this to cut. So I have the 6 millimeter, I think it's Baltic birch actually, so it's relatively hard stuff. Let's do this. Let's cut a 20 by 20 millimeter square out of it and see what happens. I'm going to go 100 millimeters a minute at full power, and we'll see what that looks like, and I'll turn on the air assist. So that did not get all the way through, but it looks like it's pretty close. So let me try that again, a little bit slowed down. So this is now cutting at 75 millimeters per minute, which is a lot slower than they recommend, but this is the reality of it. They always say, you know, oh, it can cut at 300, but no, it can't. You got to slow it way down. And we can see that there's actually smoke coming out the back on the underneath side. That's always a good sign that it's actually cutting all the way through. If you see smoke on the top, you're not cutting through. If you see smoke from underneath, you're cutting through. So this one should be good. Now you can see it just barely almost made it through. I might be able to, nope. So let's slow it down just a little bit more. And this is 60 millimeters per minute. Man, still not all the way through. Final pass. Let's go like 30. So I'm at 40 millimeters per minute. We'll see if that gets through. And this is kind of the downside to these diode lasers. This is a tough test for it. This is relatively hard material. It is something it can cut, but it needs to cut very, very slowly because it's only 10 watts. And this is the big difference between something like this and a CO2 laser. This could cut in, I don't know, a few seconds because 60 watts is just so much more powerful than this. So if you're going to be using a diode laser for serious cutting application, it's maybe not the right thing. This is much more suited towards engraving and things like that. And because of the fast motion, and diodes have a lot better precision control in terms of power. So you can go from 1 watt to 100 watt and it's pretty linear. With a CO2 laser, it's not nearly as linear. So these are just a lot better for that fine detail in engraving, but obviously their cutting performance is nowhere near that of a CO2 laser. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. But this is definitely on par for what I would expect to see from a 10 millimeter or 10 watt laser. A lot of these people say you can do 8 and 10 millimeter thick. I just don't see it in a single pass. I've never been successful or been able to do that. Even with the air assist, this is about as good as it can get in terms of cutting performance. And something like this is still going to take you several minutes just to get a very small piece cut out. Let's see. No. Okay, so that one did end up kind of popping out. It's just not getting through that final little layer. And once again, 6 millimeters, that's about the max you could expect. Little trick is you can actually drop this down just a little bit and it'll focus down a little bit lower, and that will help it cut all the way through that bottom a little bit cleaner. But yeah, cutting performance is exactly what I would expect from a 10 watt laser. If you limit yourself to 3 and 4 millimeter thick material, you should be just fine. Okay, so let's do an engraving because that's what these things are really good at. So let me go ahead and set that all up. Okay, so I'm going to do the Copperhead logo, of course, and I'm going to do this at 8,000 millimeters a minute at full power. This thing can do 20,000, but you're just not putting down that much energy into each pass, so it really comes out as a very light engraving, especially on something like this. And I'm not going to be using the pump. I'll tell you why in a second here. Start. Now I'm not going to be using the air assist pump because for engravings like this, especially on wood, it just kind of blows the particles around and they just kind of get embedded a little bit. We're not going deep enough for it to really matter, so I'm going to leave the pump off for this cut. And yeah, just kind of wait for that time lapse. And there you go. That is the finished product. This ended up taking 40 minutes, 40 minutes. And what you can't really see is the general haze here in the shop. This produces a lot of smoke from the engraving, and ideally you would have some sort of vent to vent or exhaust this outside, but these kind of open frame machines don't really account for that. So that's kind of on you. Let's see. Earlier I talked about the whole idea of 20 millimeters per second and how that's not really realistic. This, I wanted to show you the kind of the final thing. This ended up being 8,000 millimeters per minute at 100% power. So if you think about it, if I had gone up to the 20,000 millimeters per minute at 100% power, we can't go over 100%, then this is going to be less than half this darkness, because it's all about how much energy you're putting into the laser beam and putting into the material. So when we go twice as fast, it's lingering on that material half as much. So yes, these machines can absolutely do 20,000 millimeters per minute, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to produce the right level of darkness for the material that you're working on. If we were working on paper or something very thin, maybe leathers, I don't know, some other different type of material, sure, we could get up to that 20,000 millimeters a minute with 100% and actually achieve a really decent engraving, but we would only be about this level of darkness for the entire engraving if we were at that. So these are just things that you have to keep in mind, and these are the limitations of having only 10 watts at your disposal. Now, I'm not trying to talk you out of diode lasers, just, trying to point out that the advertising surrounding these things is, in my opinion, extremely deceptive. Ortur, not so much, but there's a lot of other laser manufacturers that will quote the total system power and call this like a 50 or a 60 watt laser, when in fact the laser module itself is only 10 watts. So something to keep in mind, 10 watts will do this in about 40 minutes. So let's wrap up this review. Let's first talk about software. So I didn't really go into a lot of the technical details on the software, quite frankly, because the software is pretty much the same with all of these units. They all kind of use the same interface, which is the Gerbil serial interface. And so you can use Lightburn, Laser Gerbil, or usually the software that's included with these. Over here, you see this fancy little Wi-Fi antenna. Well, that Wi-Fi antenna really only works with their proprietary software. Lightburn and others don't get to utilize that Wi-Fi. So if you want to use Wi-Fi, you got to use their own tool. I do have links down below where you can kind of get a better sense what the software looks like. A lot of these guys will have instructions for all the different software types, including their own. So check the links down below for that, because that'll give you a better idea of how the software works. Let's see, what else? I guess my final thoughts are, when you really look at this machine versus something like the Creality, which is the most recent one I reviewed, they look like they're several years apart, in terms of production. it looks like this came out now and the Creality came out 5 or 10 years ago. When you really see them side by side, I'll try to have some footage here for you to look at. The fit and finish and the features and just kind of overall the ease of use and the put togetherness of this one, that's a term I just came up with, is so much better on this. This just looks and feels like a much more completed, thought out machine, whereas something like the Creality or some of the others that I've tested really look like you could just DIY it in an afternoon. They're very, very different. And some of the little quality of life features, like the little flip down thing, this isn't my favorite, but the fact it actually has a nozzle for the air assist all the way through, it has this, it has a couple of LEDs, you know, that show when it's on, things like that. That is all really nice. And this one's just a much better put together machine. The Creality is like a little over 500 and this is about 600. For me, for the extra money, it's a no-brainer. This one is just so much better in every aspect. The lasers are going to be about the same. The motion control is going to be about the same, but it's really going to come down to just the build and the construction and everything else. The other thing I'll talk about is the air pump and this tray. I think the air pump is fine. I might, at the time of uploading this video, give you a couple other suggestions because this is like $90 and it's maybe a little bit overpriced for that, but there's not that many options out there. I'll see if I can find some other options for you. The bed is actually quite nice. I really like the bed. My only gripe with it is, obviously, you see I wasn't using that little attachment piece because it was just kind of fiddly and I didn't like it. This itself is totally fine, but it has no way to really square up inside the machine. It's roughly the same size as the build platform, but there's no way to really square it up. So if I was using this machine long term, I would probably make some sort of spacer to where it could just kind of slide up against it and you'd always be ensured that you were squared up and it would match up with the full footprint of the laser. And I'm kind of surprised that they just mean for you to just kind of plop it down here in the middle, which is kind of strange. Other than those two little gripes, this is a really nice machine, and I don't often say that, but I think it's well worth the money at, you know, roughly 600 bucks. I'll see if I have a coupon code to throw down below. I think it's a great value, and it's probably one of the best lasers in this category right now. So yeah. Anyway, hope you liked the review, and check out my other videos, and I will see you in the next one. See you guys later.